Of course, you're on your election headquarters. Now, with 2 transitions, Ghana has had 6 successful elections, and we are on to our 7th, another 4th Republic dispensation. Our elections have been monitored by the international community. Largely, the international community has described our elections as credible over the years. With 20 days to the December 7 polls, a core team of European Union observers are in Ghana. 24 observers have been deployed across the country by the EU to monitor our general elections. So if we've had 6 successful elections, why is the EU still monitoring our electoral processes? Mark Stevens is Deputy Chief Observer, European Union Election Observer Mission to Ghana 2016, and is here to help us with a conversation. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
First of all, what's your gut feeling about this election?
Well, election observers don't really follow their gut feelings. We always hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And so we're here really to observe what happens and to report and really to try and give a very honest, impartial and independent assessment. And that's why we have, as you just said, teams all over the country to try and get a feel, not just for what's happening in Accra, not what's just being reported by the media per se, but to really get a feel from all over the country.
So what's the strategy like on the ground?
Yeah, it's, basically we have a team here in Accra, 7 of us, and then we have observers in each of the regions. And we're kind of doing the similar things at the national and regional levels. So meeting the election commissions, officials, meeting political parties, meeting civil society, leaders of organisations, the police, following the election campaign, and really trying to build up a good picture, really at the grassroots, and getting the overview of everything that's going on.
So far?
So far, it's been a good engagement, actually. Our observers have been in the fields for about 10 days now, and we've been here for a few weeks. And they've been following the preparations for the election and the election campaign. So we're quite pleased with how our observers are getting on and all the different reports they're making. Of course, Ghana's a very diverse country. It's a very large country, so it's a different story in different parts of the country.
So, you know, you always come and monitor, and then in the end you say we've had successful elections. So I'm wondering why you're here. Well,
firstly, we're invited to be here by the Electoral Commission, and the European Union has a long history of engagement, as you're saying. But I would view that very much, election observation, as a support mechanism. You know, the European Union had a large mission here in 2008. It had a smaller expert team in 2012. And now it had an expert mission here in the summer following the voter registration process. This is very much sort of part of the EU's programme of support to the elections in Ghana and to the continuing strengthening of democracy in the country. You know, democracy is a process. You have to keep working at it and keep nurturing it. I think that's the way I'd see it. And election observation is part of that. And a very important part of our work is at the end is to issue a whole series of recommendations, things that can be improved for the future. And that's really very much the spirit in which we're here. In addition, the European Union supports Ghana in various other ways on its democracy. It provides support to some of the constitutional commissions, such as the National Civic and Education Commission.
The NCCE.
Yes, NCCE, and also the Electoral Commission and others. So it's really a broad body of support which has been going on for many years. But it's not our presence isn't a judgment. Our presence should be viewed as a support mechanism, really.
Anything that you've recommended in the past that you see us implement in this particular election?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. We were talking about this the other day. And some of our recommendations coincided with some of the reforms that were suggested here in Ghana, which is, you know, I think perhaps that's because they're obvious. Such as, if you look at 2012, some of the queues that were happening. Clearly they needed to reduce the number of voters at each polling station. Not everywhere, but particularly the large urban areas. I was here myself in 2012 and I remember seeing that. So I think the increase in the number of polling stations is a positive thing. Transparency measures. Elections, if you could say one key word for an electoral process that can help, it's the word transparency. You'll hear election observers say it thousands of times during their presence. It really is, any election anywhere in the world, transparency is the key. And so we made some recommendations on that, and we were quite interested to see the reforms that have been brought in have put in transparency measures for the count and the results in quite a comprehensive manner, which was very welcomed as well. So there were 2 of the areas that we sort of commented on. There are other areas we made recommendations where there haven't been changes. No, but maybe for the future, hopefully.
So such as?
Such as the size of the constituencies. Okay. There's a massive difference in the size of the constituencies. Your constitution says they should be more or less of equal size. They're not. It's a problem in a number of countries, and it's a very difficult problem to overcome. We recognise that, but we recommended it before, and I could probably predict we'll recommend it again. So that would be another one. Campaign expenditure, campaign spending. Some countries have limits on campaign spending, some don't. So that's something that we considered. But what's more critical possibly is that campaign expenditure by parties needs to be transparent and accountable. And I think that the sort of processes here are not that well developed in terms of making sure campaign expenditure is accountable. And I think that's a good practice which exists in many places.
In Ghana, we've had the US and the UK embassies react to the violent clashes, unfortunately, that we've seen, saying, for instance, that he would not grant visas to persons who are seen fomenting trouble or bringing violence in these elections. Can I get your take on this?
Well, I mean, I saw their statements. And all I would say is, from an observation mission perspective, you know, there's no place for violence in an election. I think everyone is against violence. And not least of which because any one incident is regrettable, but because one incident can lead to another incident, can lead to another, and that can spiral out of control, particularly as tensions rise during a campaign. So I think it's very important to say, you know, we're completely against violence in election. I think it should be condemned by everyone. And so I think, you know, some people have issued statements on that. What's interesting in the Ghanaian context is you have a very interesting and well-developed, what I would call election architecture. And as I go around the world in different elections, people often talk about some aspects of the Ghanaian system, and notably the IPAC mechanism and this election security task forces, which bring together various actors. And I know some people say, oh, it's not working so well, and other people say it's working very well, but the fact that it exists is a very positive feature where people can come together and discuss and receive information and discuss and try and resolve misunderstandings or disputes before they get out of control. So I think those two things, and also the very active involvement of civil society, the very active involvement of religious leaders and such things.
There's an issue with the kind of language that we use, because there are some stations that are affiliated to certain political parties. Right. Is that one that you're monitoring as well? Yeah,
I mean, we do. We try to look at a cross-section of media, it's fair to say. We can't do it all, but we look at a good cross-section. And we do, one of the things we look for is the type of language that's used and whether it's you know, offensive or incitement and such things. And that's part of the thing we'll take into our analysis at the end.
Do you have local people with you who translates, who do the translations?
Yes, yeah, no, of course. We have a media expert as part of our core team from the EU, and then she works with a team of I'll get this wrong, 7 or 8 monitors, something like this.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay, so we're having a conversation with Max Stevens, who is Deputy Chief Observer, European Union Election Observation Mission, Ghana 2016. Essentially, they're here to monitor our elections, but not only on election day, during, before, and then after the elections as well, right here on the AM show. So let's talk about you know, the observations that you've made elsewhere. Mm-hmm. How do they, for instance, resolve their electoral disputes?
Okay. In other countries, I mean, there are different models. In some countries, the election administration has a larger role in election dispute resolution. In other countries, it's the courts. And sometimes it's a mix. In a sense, every country makes its own decision on how it wants these things to be resolved. Mm-hmm. From our perspective, the important things are, firstly, there needs to be a process for the resolution of election disputes. And secondly, they need to be done in a transparent and timely way. So the bad practices you can find, I'm not saying they're here in Ghana, but it's always good to be aware of this, is when people can go decision shopping. So you go to an election commission, you make an appeal, it rejects it. So you go to a court, you make an appeal, it rejects it. You go to another court, it can go on and on. In some countries, they don't have this. So you need a point of final instance, a reasonably efficient system. Mm. But there's different ways of approaching it. The Ghanaian system is a perfectly reasonable way of having this election commission decision. You can go to court to contest that and a court decision. So, you know, it's a perfectly sort of regular process in that regard.
How much of the court processes after the 2012 elections did you monitor? Because we're in court for such a long time.
You were, and I of course couldn't be here for 8 months or 9 months. I was here actually in 2012 observing the election, but we left just, I think, 2 weeks after the election. So we're very much focusing on the process up to the announcement of the result.
Did you think we were going to be in courts?
I remember when we left, the opposition was saying they were going to go to court, and I think that was just starting. So, and that's what happened, and that's fine. Again, that's what's foreseen. Your constitution says that if you want to petition against the results of the presidential election, you go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court heard it, and it issued a ruling. It took quite a long time to do that, but that's another issue. It issued a very detailed ruling, and although it ultimately rejected the complaint and upheld the result, it issued a whole series of comments on different parts of the process. And I think that sort of fed into the later reform process. So I think there's some good things came out of that.
Do you see us implement some of the recommendations?
Yeah, as I said earlier, this thing about the biometric verification machines, I think I was here in 2012 and I saw the implication of no fingerprint, no vote.
Yeah.
And that
no verification, no votes.
No verification, no vote. Sorry, yeah.
Now we have another.
And now you have a
it doesn't verify.
Yeah, and I know there's a level of uncertainty about once you start having alternative things. My personal impression and the recommendation we made in 2012 when I was here is that it's good to have a backup system, because there were people standing there through no fault of their own were disenfranchised just because their fingerprint was worn because of the type of work they do, or because the machine had got greasy, or because the battery wasn't working properly. That's not what should happen. The point of an election is to try and facilitate the franchise to vote, but in a safe and secure way with the integrity of the vote. So I think what Ghana's come up with now is a good alternative. You've got you can do the fingerprint verification. If that doesn't work for whatever reason, you've got the barcode on the electoral register, which still on the machine throws up the picture of the person, and you can look at the picture and verify the person is who they say they are. So I think it's a good mechanism to have been brought in, yeah.
Some of us haven't monitored other elections, even on the continent. We're only used to what we do here.
Yeah.
But we've also heard that other places are not as smooth as what happens in Ghana. I know that you don't compare with what you do as a monitoring mission. But what do you think about African leaders? I mean, is it the power? Are we so power drunk we want to hold on at all costs?
I don't know. I don't have to comment on that. I mean, I think elections are a contest for power, and that's if you speak to an academic, that's how they'll start to define elections. And people get very concerned about the winner-takes-all mentality sometimes in an election, not only as it relates to the first-past-the-post system, which Ghana has and which we have in the UK as well, but in winner-takes-all in the sense of a broader sense that once people come to power. So I know there's always, in many countries one visits, there's a discussion about this, but as I say, I don't really want to sort of compare countries or comment on others at this stage.
I understand.
I think Ghana's got a history. In your introduction, you talked about this is the 7th election since the introduction of the multi-party system with 2 changes of power. I think Ghana's got a lot to be proud of. I think what it needs to do is recognise what it's got to be proud of, keep building on it, keep strengthening it, and keep making it better and better. That's the important thing for Ghana, not to compare it to elsewhere.
If you were to give us some prompters with what you've observed so far, what would you say to all of us?
I don't know.
Going into the elections.
Yeah, I'd say that at this point in the election, the same as you'd say anywhere, to be honest. There needs to be a peaceful election. The election authorities need to be allowed to do their job and get on with organising it. And the political parties and the election commission need to try and find a good, constructive relationship. There needs to be patience once the process is underway, and patience once the results process is underway. But at the same time, on the election authority's shoulders, there must be transparency. There must be confidence, so the stakeholders feel confidence in it and then feel confidence in the result at the end, and that the result is accepted whichever way it goes. That's the most important thing. Yeah. I look at this in many countries. Once an election is over, the most important thing is that the day after, the country moves on.
Back to your being here. You're not here because you fear something could happen. That's why you're here to monitor.
No, it's very much a support mechanism. You know, the European Union is supporting Ghana, and it's further strengthening and deepening of democracy, really.
Oh, the EU has given us a lot of money, and they want to see how we are using the monies that they've given us.
I don't know about that. I'm just the observation mission.
Yeah, so. I get it. But thank you so much
okay.
for your time.
Thanks
for being here. We wish you well. Any new things you've learned from Ghana?
I don't know new
Nothing?
things. No,
you were here in 2012.
I was here in 2012.
And you're back here in 2016.
I've learned where the courts are. Yeah.
We'll teach you a few things. But we're grateful that you could join us here
Thanks
on the
very
show.
much.
That's Max Stevens. He's Deputy Chief Director, European Union Election Observation Mission, Ghana 2016. It's just some 56 minutes after 7 here on the AM show.